Good day, everyone. Our program will begin in just a moment. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good day and welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by American Jewish Committee. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's digital platform that enables you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Earlier this month, on March 10th, regional rivals Saudi Arabia and Iran announced their agreement to resume diplomatic relations. The biggest surprise was who brokered the deal: China. Joining us today to discuss this major development and to analyze what it means for the Middle East, Israel, and the entire world are longtime China experts Mercy Kuo, Executive Vice President of Pamir Consulting, and Carice Witte, Executive Director of Signal, Sino-Israel Global Network and Academic Leadership. And moderating today's conversation is Shira Loewenberg, Director of AJC's Asia Pacific Institute. After we hear from our esteemed guests, we will take your questions. You may email your question to questions@ajc.org. That's questions plural, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Shira, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Carice and Mercy, for joining us, and thank you to our audience for taking time out of your day to join us. I have been looking forward to this conversation since March 10th, and I'm eager to share it with everyone who is watching. So I'm just going to plunge right in and hope for a lively conversation that then the audience will participate in as well. Mercy, I'm going to start off with you. So there was this announcement on March 10th, got a lot of attention. Could you set the stage for us? What has China's footprint been in the Middle East over the last decade? And what does this indicate about China's ambitions in the region? And then a second question to go along with that is, what does China's position in the Middle East, does it necessarily contradict or is it confrontational with US presence or US interests, or is there a way for China and the United States to complement each other or coexist in the region?
Thank you, Shira, for this question and also for inviting me to join this conversation. Thank you also to AJC for the invitation to share some thoughts on this very timely topic. Let me preface my response first by sharing just some thoughts on what China wants, and then mentioning the Russian factor in this equation, and then get into the questions. So Beijing really aspires to restore China's centrality in the global system. This aspiration has deep historical underpinnings. And Moscow is seeking to achieve Russia's revanchist agenda at all costs. China and Russia, together in concert, are trying to achieve their separate and shared agendas. And what does that mean? They are both striving to reconfigure the international rules-based order to serve their national interest. China's paramount leader, Xi Jinping, and the Chinese Communist Party are attempting to position China as a global rule maker, system shaper, and standard setter. In contrast, as a disruptor and spoiler, Vladimir Putin and the Kremlin are seeking to revive Russia's relevance as a great imperial power. Together, China and Russia are seeking to rewrite the rules of this global world order and challenge US leadership, as well as propagate an authoritarian alternative system of governance. So that's the backdrop, and now let's set the scene. China's modern foreign policy approach to the Middle East under Xi Jinping's leadership since his ascent in 2013 really has focused on bolstering China's economic and increasingly geopolitical influence in the Middle East, North Africa, Persian Gulf region. And Beijing is seeking to exert this growing influence through what it calls comprehensive strategic partnerships with 5 key MENA, Middle East, North African countries: Israel, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Iran. China is the Arab world's leading trade partner and has been since 2020. surpassing 330 billion in two-way trade since 2021. China's imports of Iranian oil have increased by 1.2 million barrels per day since 2022, a 130% increase since 2021, and it will continue to increase. Saudi Arabia supplies 70% of China's oil and 40% of its gas. So this region, the Middle East, is an integral region also in China's Belt and Road Initiative, initiated in 2013, and its Global Security Initiative announced in 2021. If we look at specifically the BRI, since it has more of this history in this decade, the Suez Canal, the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, the Bab el-Mandab Strait, the Strait of Hormuz, and the Indian Ocean are all key waterways and choke points in China's Maritime Silk Road, which is one facet of the BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. And its purpose is to link Africa and the Middle East with Asia through shipping maritime routes. So it's important to understand there's a broader context going on here, a strategic context. And this context really is great power competition, specifically US-China strategic competition in the region, and then more broadly, this great power rivalry between the US and EU-led liberal democratic rules-based order and the China-Russia-led authoritarian alternative. So this geostrategic contest, if you will, is unfolding in the global South, meaning Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East. So this is really the global context. But specifically for the Middle East, the regional dynamics in this part of the world are optimal for China and Russia to embolden Iran, to capitalize on the Iran-Saudi Arabia rivalry, and also to compel Israel to hedge against this great power competition. So I'll just leave it at that and hand it back over to you, Shira.
Thank you. That's a really great kind of big picture to look at. So thank you for that. Carice, I want to turn to you. I don't know if you have any comments on this overview that Mercy put forward, but I'd also like from you, from your perspective, working specifically on Israel-China relations, if you can fill in more details about what China's, in this global context, in the Middle East context, what China's interests in Israel are. Mercy mentioned the 5 major countries in the Middle East that China has maybe greater interest in, and Israel is one of them. So could you please comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, I too want to thank you and AJC for the invitation. It's a great opportunity to discuss a critical topic that, as Mercy has outlined so beautifully, is indicative of a new era. As Xi Jinping says, we are definitely, we have moved into a new era. I had a group of Chinese in my office today from, I'm speaking to you from Israel. And Chinese have returned. We are getting Chinese groups, and they're talking about the fact that China is now a more confident people, a more confident country. And we're seeing that manifestation day by day increasing. I want to just add a couple of points to Mercy's very comprehensive list of what's going on in the Middle East, to note that the digital Silk Road, the BRI includes not only, the physical infrastructure, but the digital infrastructure. And this digital infrastructure has a lot to do with some of the leverage that Beijing has with Saudi Arabia. On the one hand, it's a monopoly buyer of Saudi oil, which gives it a lot of power. Monopoly buyer. There's no one else in the region or in the world who needs as much energy from Saudi Arabia as China. And the second thing is its digital prowess, helping MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, raise his country beyond energy into becoming an innovative digital powerhouse. They're creating an entire city powered completely by solar with advanced AI chips from AI technology from China. So this this strengthened China's ability to be the broker of the Saudi-Iran deal. I want to also add that when BRI investment was dropping around the world, it was increasing in the Middle East, and that Iraq became the largest recipient of BRI investment in 2021, and 57% of all BRI investment so far this year has gone into the Middle East. Again, I was speaking with a Chinese scholar yesterday, and he explained to me that as China's options and opportunities with North America and Europe have been diminishing, the Middle East has become much more of a focus and much more of an interest of China's efforts. So what we have felt is that we have a different experience in Israel than the rest of the Middle East. On the one hand, Israel has been a source of a target for innovation and advanced technology by China, but that diminished a great deal right before COVID. We do see a return of interest in talent and certain technologies. However, the compelling balance is leaning always on the side of the rest of the Middle East, and that has a lot to do with the numbers. President Xi Jinping speaks a lot about having issues addressed in the United Nations and strengthening the United Nations. You have the Global Development Initiative, which is supposed to help advance UN goals. So this is very much a numbers game. And when it comes to Israel versus the Muslim world, you've got 56 votes on one side and 1 vote on the other. So while there is about a $13 billion trade balance between between China and Israel, it is minute compared to the rest of the region. China has expressed its awareness that if it wants to be a serious player, or any power that wants to be a serious player in the region, has to cultivate good relations with Israel, recognizing Israel's regional, can you hear me? Because I see that I'm having, yeah. Okay. Recognizing Israel's regional sort of superpower status and the fact that our military is top 4 in the world. However, the relevance of the other countries in the Middle East is not just significant for Israel when it comes to the United Nations, but also for our own regional security. Where we look at investment in Iraq, will it move to Syria? What will happen in Lebanon? And where will China's balance be? With the Iran-Saudi deal, we know that China came in sort of at the last section of this, and the heavy lifting was done by Oman and Iraq and even the United States. The fact that they were able to conclude this deal raises, on the one hand, it seems very impressive. On the other hand, we know that Saudi Arabia was greatly motivated to have a rapprochement with Iran in order to stabilize its borders and end tensions in Yemen. Can China actually make that happen? Is China's aversion to using hard power as a tool of within great power rivalry, will that enable China to really support the interests of the two parties? And if that doesn't happen, what will that mean for other kinds of other negotiations? Mercy mentioned Russia. It's been expected that maybe China would be able to step in with Russia, Ukraine. However, Xi Jinping, on his way back from his recent visit to Russia, did not stop off in Ukraine. We have not heard any more about the phone call that was supposed to happen with Zelensky. So while that was a very exciting development, both for China and also Washington commended China on, as it well should, on finalizing that rapprochement, we don't know if China has the tools to carry forward and be a real mediator.
Right. Thank you. You provided a great segue. I'm going to turn it back to Mercy, but I also want to hear more from you, Carice. About the deal that was announced, the China broker deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. So it created a lot of hype and a lot of chatter and a lot of concern that this, shows finally it's the coming out party for China on the world stage. It is the new negotiator. Is it more hype than reality, or does this actually signify a new place for China, new role for new may not be the right word, but a role for China in what it has been proclaiming as its ambition? Does this mean anything, or is it a lot of hot air? So Mercy, first you, and then back to Carice.
Well, let me try to unpack this question by answering it in two parts. First, the symbolism of the agreement, and then the substance of it. So China's role in brokering the Iran-Saudi Arabia détente really was heavy on symbolism and light on substance. And the impact of this agreement needs to be viewed at different levels according to specific audiences. For the global audience, specifically the global South, Africa, Latin America, and the Middle East, Beijing scored high marks for showmanship. And Wang Yi, China's top diplomat, performed well in projecting the semblance of statesmanship on behalf of his boss, Xi Jinping. For China's domestic audience, particularly China's political elites and the Chinese Communist Party, this deal cemented Xi Jinping, the authority of Xi Jinping's faction within internal Chinese CCP, the party's internal politics, and among China's political elites. For Riyadh and Tehran, China was their preferred broker in a way to signal to the West in a very significant way that authoritarian statecraft, the authoritarian model of governance, is now indeed a viable and powerful alternative to the West's rules-based liberal system of governance. So in this sense, it was a very significant symbolic signal to the global South, to the Middle East, because you have here a club of autocrats, if you will, China, Iran, and Saudi Arabia coalescing and showing that they can actually get something done on a significant scale. All right, so for Tehran in specific, China is Iran's top trading partner. They both share autocratic affinities. They both proactively seek ways to challenge Jewish leadership in the region. For Riyadh, Mohammed bin Salman is hedging, and he is very skillfully playing the US and China off of each other in order to extract greater concessions from the United States vis-a-vis Washington's efforts to facilitate normalization of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel under the auspices of the Abraham Accords. And then for Israel, I would submit that this deal actually raises the stakes for Israel's foreign policy approach in managing the US-China strategic competition in the region. Beijing will continue to engage Israel in ways that will advance its commercial, technological, digital, as Carice rightly pointed out, and geopolitical interests to serve its interests within the region. So Israel's response to China's various moves, including this agreement, really will test how much Jerusalem understands the challenge that China poses to Israel's relationship with the United States. So that's the symbolism side. Putting this agreement in perspective in terms of substance, it's no way, if we look at the historical backdrop behind this, it's no way akin to, say, a Camp David Accords or the Abraham Accords. But as we know, and as Carice laid out, it opens a way to resume diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran by reopening their respective embassies. It maybe will bring a temporary cessation of hostilities with the Houthis in Yemen. That's not 100% guaranteed, but at least it's on the table. And most importantly, it brings a stabilizing factor to the region, which it will benefit all parties including the United States. But if I may, let's just take a deeper look at how China's role through this agreement, what impact it has on the deeper regional dynamics. So does China's role inherently alter the fundamental friction in Iran-Saudi Arabia rivalry? No, it does not. Does Iran still seek to be a regional hegemon? Yes, it does. Will Saudi Arabia continue to oppose Tehran's ambitions to be a regional hegemon? Yes. Do Sunni and Shiite Muslim animosities still exist in both countries? Yes. Does the agreement stipulate some kind of referee role for China in the event that one of the countries reneges or violates the agreement? No, there's nothing there. Some have argued that maybe this agreement is the first step in laying the groundwork for regional security architecture. If this is the case, we know China is playing the long game here. They have made it very clear through the Global Security Initiative that they seek to establish some kind of regional security framework in support with the League of Arab States. So this is definitely on China's agenda. It really confirms that they do have longer-term geopolitical ambitions in the region. And then let me just wrap up my point here, just with one thought, is that the US is still the paramount military power in the Middle East. The US Navy in the world. The US Navy's Fifth Fleet still is based in Bahrain. Regional military operations are operated out of Qatar. US forces in Saudi Arabia number approximately 2,755 and provide air and missile defense capabilities. The US has 5 Air Force bases across the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And as this audience knows well, the US has a permanent military base in the Negev Desert in Israel. So all this to say is that China has demonstrated adept soft power through this agreement. But the US hard power still, I think, confirms that underscores at least the US commitment to the region's security and stability.
Thanks. You highlight something, and Carice, I'd love your perspective on it, but Mercy, you highlighted the symbolic strength of brokering this agreement and what it means to many countries in the Middle East and the global South. Carice, I'd love to hear from you how, through the Israeli lens, of how China's role in this agreement and with what Mercy described in the Middle East, what Israel's perspective in the way that Israelis or the Israeli leadership views this.
First of all, I want to note that the deal was a feather in Beijing's Global Security Initiative cap in a way that should concern the leadership in Jerusalem and also in Washington with respect to paying closer attention. Mercy's right when it comes to hard power. As I said earlier, there's no sign that Beijing has any ability to calm the border or any intention or even the tools. I also agree with Mercy that they're going for the long game. And that is, as she said in the very beginning, rewriting the rules of the global order, reshaping it in the image of China, at least from China's perspective, in order to make the world a better place for China's interests or the interest of China's leadership. And the Global Security Initiative, along with, we started with, if we think back, we had the One Belt, One Road, and that name was not changed in Chinese, but it was changed in English away from that because it gave the image of being China-centric. And China, as much as Xi Jinping put away Deng Xiaoping's hide and bide, hide your power and bide your time, he wasn't ready yet to come full on. So what we are seeing is, what we saw, was the new name of Belt and Road Initiative. And that name became, the word initiative became very valuable. We got the Global Development Initiative and the Global Security Initiative. And now we have the Global Civilization Initiative, which one of its top priorities is to, as the initiative notes, no country has a monopoly on the definition of democracy. And once upon a time, maybe 5, 7 or 8 years ago, the leadership of China said that democracy is not for everyone. Maybe it's for rich countries, developed countries. Each country should have its own style of leadership, of its own system of governance. But now, a more confident China says, no, we are going to redefine democracy to something that suits our democracy, because clearly democracy, or at least it indicates that the term democracy has a lot of power. So when we sit here in Israel and we watch this reshaping of global order happening very incrementally, and we see this global security initiative announced by Xi Jinping at the BOA Forum in 2021, and then the next thing we hear is that Wang Yi is saying it will serve as a security architecture for the Middle East specifically. When Israel hears that China is talking about a security framework for the Middle East, we don't get the sense that that's going to really benefit Israel. Once again, I come back to the balance of votes. At the same time, the Saudi-Iran agreement, and Mercy was right, nothing changes. All of those relationships remain tense or at odds with each other. But I would say that rapprochement with Iran frees up Saudi Arabia to normalize with Israel, because it is looking more balanced. Imagine if it tried to normalize with Israel without having relations with Saudi Arabia on the one hand. At the same time, we know that in the same breath that they signed that agreement, they submitted to the State Department a list of things that they want from the US in order to normalize with Israel. So it doesn't minimize or diminish. I also agree that MBS is playing a smart game, but I think that we have to acknowledge that the United States gave him a lot of cards to play with. By focusing on MBS's personal record or the image of MBS, with respect to Khashoggi, et cetera, and the way that Biden treated MBS caused him or motivated him to turn more towards China, and then in turn demand more for either not continuing on this path with China or moving towards Israel. I want to also note that one of the first things that happened after this deal was signed is that the Palestinians turned to Beijing and asked them to address the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. And that was a solid no. We have to remember that this was low-hanging fruit. The deal was close to being ready. The risk is relatively low. The upside was very high. Optics were very valuable. And as it was explained to me by a Chinese expert, it's very clear to Beijing that there's no comparison between the two. This is the Saudis and Iranians were ready to come together. The Palestinians and the Israelis are nowhere near that situation. But just to close, I want to stress that when Israel first heard about the deal, they were upset because the idea or the sense is that a deal like this will lead to more funding available to Iran. And every dollar or renminbi that comes into the hands of Iran is understood to be used against Israel one way or another, either directly through proxies, by strengthening its nuclear military program. So that Iranian concern remains a top priority.
I want to come back to points I think that both of you agreed on with this deal, that there's more symbolism than substance to it. you both pointed to China's great economic interest in the Middle East, particularly with energy needs. And I want to ask you both, actually, about Chinese economic interests not being supported then by security guarantees or by military interests. So the US is the one that really is dominant militarily. Can China secure its economic interests without investing further militarily?
Mercy, you want to take that first?
Would you like to take it?
I mean, they've already shown they can. They're all over the world, advancing their economic interests without having military backup. At the same time, we know that China is building up its military. It revamped its military in 2016, making it more lean and mean. That Xi Jinping has said many times, the military needs to prepare to win at war. There's a lot of concern about Taiwan because it sounds like the leadership of China is preparing for war, and that is the war that seems of most interest, because when we talk about the national rejuvenation of the PRC, Taiwan is integral, and we are repeatedly reminded of its centrality to that. So, but when it comes to economics and geoeconomics, the Belt and Road Initiative has had lots of problems and had security issues, but that did not really demand military security. And I think the opposite, that China is going to use its own style. It doesn't want hegemonic power like the US. It doesn't want to necessarily lead the world through military strength. It's looking to do it exactly in the way that Mercy outlined at the very beginning. If you reshape the rules and norms, and you institute things like we're a community with a shared destiny, and you integrate that into every agreement that is signed with the United Nations, signed with the Arab League, all over the world, these phrases are integrated into the documents, creating a normative foundation of a new kind of power structure that is in the image of China. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of pieces on the board of a game of Go that are very strategically placed, very carefully, in order to slowly achieve, what Sun Tzu wrote about, some version of strategic encirclement, where the interests of, we can start with the global South, because that we're talking about something like 130 plus countries versus the developed world, which is something like under 40 countries. So when you are offering economic development and economic solutions and technological and digital answers that the United States cannot provide. The United States does not have an answer to Huawei. You need to put together 3 different or 4 different high-tech companies from the United States and Europe to match Huawei, and it's not happening. So there's no alternative. And once China has that technical economic presence that may well include trading in renminbi, using China's digital currency, you develop a fait accompli.
So I believe that China talks about security through development, that's some phraseology like that. Mercy, is that really possible? And does China have greater ambitions in terms of a stronger military presence than it already has, something which is more of a rival to the US or replacing the US in the Middle East?
I think Carice laid it out. I mean, her outline was very solid in the sense of we see different dimensions of China's exercise of national power, right? So there is the economic part of it, there's the military part of it, there's also what's the Chinese call discourse power for Chinese speakers out there, Huayuquan. And China has shown that this framing some kind of narrative that is attractive, that incentivizes countries to think about, oh, I have other options. We have other options, and China is offering them. So if we look at what's happening in the Middle East, and Carice alluded to this earlier, Saudi Arabia, Huawei is in there developing 5G, 6G technology, smart city grids, biotechnology, the whole gamut. Saudi Arabia wants to buy. There's also the surveillance technology that it's also interested in. Through this deal, in some ways, Iran is being brought out of the cold, given all the sanctions from the JCPOA. So now China is offering it a way out by buying more of its oil. Various options, all right. And then Israel, China, like I said earlier, China is still very much interested in Israeli technology. So it's a matter about offering all these options. Now, to your question, Shira, is the military angle a longer term objective for China? For now, and again, as Carice rightly pointed out, the cross-strait conflict, that is the top priority for China. Okay, if right now, hypothetically, I'm in Beijing and I'm looking out at the global landscape, I see one powder keg situation right now in Ukraine and Russia, and the US is very much involved in that. Then I'm preparing at some point, we're going to resolve the unification question of China and Taiwan. China's definitely preparing for that. It does not want to be drawn into any kind of conflict in the Middle East. You asked earlier about the Israel-Palestine question. China in 2013, I believe, offered a 4-point plan to the Israelis and Palestinians. Non-starter. Okay, just basically didn't say anything, this proposal. And then recently, last year, China offered their 12-point plan for ending Russia's war in Ukraine. Also, non-starter, met with huge skepticism from the West. So China, this is a pattern, if we look at Chinese foreign policy, consistent through the years. They will position themselves to fashion an image of being a peacemaker, but they have no intention of getting their hands dirty in the actual peacemaking process, because it is arduous and it requires losing face. And we all know Xi Jinping does not want to lose his face. So right now they're going to focus on the geoeconomic aspect of it, because they really have incentives. They are offering incentives to these global South countries. And because I will say though, the US and Europe, they recognize this. So they are now coming in, also offering more funding to the global South, because they understand this competition is ramping up and the US cannot just stand on the sidelines and watch it happen. So in this regard, the competition is real, but China is going to play it through, not necessarily through hard power at this time. It will leverage its economic power, technology, and other more soft power tools for the time being.
If I can just throw in one more point that I think is germane to the, if we look from Ukraine to across the world to Taiwan, war was not an option for China for most of its modern history. And in fact, I think it was seen as a way, as something that would, over the recent 25 years, a way that would bring down the leadership. Up until the transformation of the military and a rethink on China's confidence and what rejuvenation means and the target of Taiwan, And at that point, I would say up until the invasion of Ukraine, there was a window when there was a feeling in China's upper echelons that war could bring honor and success, whether they had territorial achievements or not, whether soldiers were lost or not, whereas prior to that, that was anathema. We've seen the border disputes with India take place repeatedly over the last 5 years. But when Beijing saw the hugely successful military power of Russia, which had so quickly taken Crimea and so successfully ran the show in Syria, falter so tremendously in Ukraine, I think that it was a real lesson. And I sit here again from Israel, where battle and war is an everyday phenomena. Beijing came to the conclusion that the lack of battle experience of its soldiers, and China, none of them, they're all too young. There's not a single soldier alive who ever saw real hot conflict, except for those few guys in the Himalayas, and they were using like sticks. So not only do you need battle experience, you need specific battle experience. So maybe Putin's army had the tools to deal with the situation in Syria, but clearly it did not have the tools to deal with whatever the situation was in Ukraine. Now, transmute that to Taiwan. There is, in my mind, and I don't know if there are many who agree with me, but in my mind, it is off the table. It would take an extreme action by the United States, and I don't think it may be a European country, and a major accident or an extreme action to provoke China into a war over Taiwan. I think China is, and President Xi Jinping is very aware of his strengths and the country's strengths, and they lie in all of the other areas that we outlined, except, short of military power. It is very tough, even though they have more naval ships now, they have a larger standing army, but you need to know how to use them in order to be effective. And, for all the reasons that the United States has made trouble for itself in the Middle East, it has a huge amount of battle experience in all kinds of terrain and territory and situations. So I think that the one positive thing that we can say is that a hot war is not in the offing.
Thanks. I'm going to ask one more question, which I think is a brief one, and then turn things over to you, Daniel, to take questions, which I assume have been pouring in from our audience. Carice, for you, does the situation in the Middle East with China taking on a prominent role, with China's interests in Israel, does Israel have leverage? May be too strong a word, but I'm going to use the word leverage. Does Israel have any leverage with China about serving Israel's own interests in that relationship?
Well, that is a sore spot for me. I think I also appreciate your sensitivity to the word leverage. I also use that word, and many Israeli military, former leaders, et cetera, officials, feel that the way that they see the term leverage is much more traditional, hard power oriented. Obviously, we are never going to have that. However, if you're talking on Chinese terms with China, which I think that's the way one must, it's always, every country in the world has leverage with US and China. And some of them are really figuring out how to gain benefits. Saudi Arabia is one example. But Israel does, even though Israel is clearly in the camp of the United States, people say, oh, you're going to have to choose. We chose in the 50s. That's not relevant these days. But given the fact that we have this close relationship with the United States, we are still not the United States. We are not the 51st state. And we have a different perspective and we have different things to offer. And there is absolutely potential for leverage with China and with the United States, but it has to be done from a position of real understanding of what are the interests and issues relating to those two countries. So I would say that, yes, it's possible. Are we there right now? I don't think so.
Mercy, do you have any comment or move on?
I would just underscore Carice's point. It depends on the context. What are the stakes involved and risk levels for Israel? So in that sense, Israel needs to define its own positions, obviously for the sake of Israel's national interests. And I think it does. I would agree. It does have enough wherewithal. We know it punches above its weight in many aspects. But I think what is going on now, and Carice can speak to this more so than I can, but just as an outsider watching what is going on in Israel's domestic politics, the major concern is what regional powers, would they take advantage of that? Obviously, hopefully it's not going to be a protracted turmoil that's going on, but on the long run, Israeli governance, right? Its institutions, its leadership, that's going to speak volumes about how it will exercise its foreign policy and diplomacy on the global stage.
I think I need to say one word about that. It's probably on the minds of many of your viewers today and many Jews around the world and many observers. I do not expect this is not going to lead to the fall of democracy. Jews are deeply liberally democratic at their core. The most conservative extremist Jews are still liberal Democrats in the big picture. What we're going through now, I think very much has to do with a lot of, Israel being a small beleaguered country, and I think everyone's aware, it's terror, war, votes against us in the United Nations. It's an endless litany of delegitimization. And as a result, there's a mindset of putting out fires. And if you're not going to present the powers that be with a fire, you're not going to get their attention because they are literally in the middle of putting out fires. I think it's actually good news that we are seeing our democracy and the different balance of power in Israel, and the issue of a constitution, the basic law. These are all things that were backburnered as issues because we had other big fires like Iran. Now this has become the fire and it's drawing a lot of attention. And when you put a lot of Jews in a room, they may fight, but in the end, they're going to come to an answer because they have to. And at the end of the day, they're pretty practical. And there's no way that any regional conflict is going to take advantage, because the minute we have an external problem, you will see everyone snap into whatever is going on internally. The minute there's an outside enemy threatening the physical security of the country, everybody will rally together. They may stop as soon as that problem is over, but I don't see that as being an issue. And I'm sure that we're going to come out stronger and better on the other side.
Okay, Daniel, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Shira. And we have a lot of questions, so I'll try and get to as many as possible in the limited time we have left. So I'll ask two now, one to you, Mercy, and one to you, Carice. So Mercy, from Joan Silber in St. Louis, will this agreement truly result in peace in Yemen? And to what degree did Saudi Arabia join the agreement with hope for quiet in Yemen and to continue its sale of oil to China as a competitor to Russia and Iran? And then Carice, for you, from Murray Lee in Seattle, how much of this diplomatic push by China in the Middle East is to distract and invoke uncertainty for the US, who wants to minimize their footprint in the Middle East, from their goal to pivot to more focus on the Asia Pacific region? So Mercy, I'll start with you on the question regarding Yemen.
Regarding Yemen, I think we're a long way from that. It's at best a temporary cessation of hostilities. As I said in my comments, if the longer term goal is peace, there will be still many steps toward that. Saudi Arabia really wanted to resolve or at least manage the Houthis in Yemen, because it's causing too much destabilization in the region, and Riyadh wants to focus on its priorities. So to the extent that this agreement could at least temporarily halt the conflict, it does serve Saudi Arabia's interest for the time being. And then, of course, Saudi Arabia, we will see this will continue to court China as long as both sides, their relationship, whether it's through Saudi Arabia being a prime oil supplier and China being a consumer, this serves both sides' interests. And of course, Riyadh is keeping an eye on Washington, D.C. to see how Washington reacts. And of course, keeping the lines of communication open with Washington, because when all is said and done, that is a security relationship that serves Saudi Arabia's interests. So it is in Mohammed bin Salman's interest to keep lines of communications open with Washington.
I guess I'll jump in. I just have to say that the news is that there is not yet any quiet on the Saudi border with Yemen, and there's no promise of that, and no guarantee, and nothing, as Mercy pointed out, that China's going to do to make it happen. And it'll be interesting to see how everybody looks at that agreement if the tensions get further out of hand. Regarding a push in the Middle East as a distraction to the United States, Murray, I don't think that there's anything happening in the Middle East right now that would constitute a distraction for the United States, because the US is distracted enough in Ukraine. And that is, in fact, exactly what the question that you raised. We see that President Xi was not happy with what's going on in Ukraine. Ukraine was a good friend to China. And I won't go into all the wonderful things that Ukraine did for China over the years because we don't have time. But when Xi Jinping has to weigh whether he is going to stand by his respect for territorial integrity that has been the ideology of China for decades, or support Putin. And on the one side, he has pressure for the US, expense for the US, distraction for the US, support Putin, or not support Putin. And we see what the answer is. He's going to swallow quite a lot of trouble that Russia has caused him with Europe and beyond, in order to not give the US a win and keep money and focus on Ukraine so that it doesn't move to the South China Sea and closer to China.
Thank you. Our next question comes from Shrub Kempner in Galveston, and Carice, I'll address this to you. In light of all the recent developments, how do you think China would react if Israel is to attack Iranian nuclear facilities? Will it be only diplomatically or something more forcefully?
That's a very interesting question. I don't think that if Israel attacks Iran's nuclear facilities, the region will go up in flames. The price of oil will hit $300 instantaneously, and China will likely do what it can to rein everybody in, not add oil to the fire, because it can't survive. That's an existential issue for China. $300 a barrel, existential issue. When Iran hit the refinery in Saudi Arabia, they were spending an extra $97 million a day on the cost of oil because the price went up so high. And I am told Xi Jinping made a call to President Raisi and said, take it easy. Friends are friends, but this is too expensive. And we didn't see any more of those efforts by Iran against Saudi Arabia. So I think that that is a conflagration that will be beyond the pale.
Thank you, Carice. Shira, I don't know if you're trying to jump in.
Yeah, I wondered if Mercy had any comment on that or move on. Okay, thanks.
So in the remaining 5 minutes, I'll ask 2 final questions. Mercy, the first one to you, which is from Paul Epner on Zoom. India has described its current dependence on Russia military hardware as being born in the United States' historical unwillingness to sell the military hardware India requested. Are there any categories of technology or products that Saudi Arabia or other Arab powers seek from the US for which the US is saying no, but China is saying yes? And if so, will that create long-term dependency? And then Carice, for you, from Fred Berkowitz in San Diego, and actually a few others have been talking about this historic truce between Saudi Arabia and Iran that China brokered. Is China willing to step up and play a central role in negotiating perhaps a settlement in Russia-Ukraine or even in Israel-Palestine? How do you see that playing out? So Mercy, we'll start with you on the India question.
Regarding Saudi Arabia and in terms of its expectations for weaponry from the US and China, we know that China is helping Saudi Arabia to build a drone factory in the kingdom. But on the bigger issue regarding the US in terms of the discussions, all right, of normalizing relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, one of the conditions put forth by Riyadh was they wanted US support in a civil nuclear program, and then also to send more weapons, more advanced weapons. Now, the US is hesitant to do this. They want to see how the developments in the region evolve. They understand that China also is competing. So this is and then they don't want, Washington does not want to see, all right, there's the Iran nuclear issue, and then any further escalation with the Saudis getting into the picture and developing a nuclear program. So this is the more of the strategic calculus going on. On the long run, we'll see Washington is watching, again, the turmoil in the region, and then also Saudi Arabia's next steps with China.
Okay, I guess I should jump in with an answer to the China's mediation projections. So Russia-Ukraine, as I mentioned, there was some talk. Nothing has happened. I believe that it's possible. I mean, China can step in at any time that it sees fit on a lot of issues because it's building all of that wonderful soft power leverage through economics and other tools. So, for example, when it finalized the deal with Saudi Iran, it would conceivably have been possible to say, and by the way, lay off on Israel. Why is China, a rising Chinese version of a superpower, allowing one nation in the United Nations to call for the extinction of another nation in the United Nations? We've been told, and we've asked the Chinese that question directly many times. The government has asked, and we've asked various think tanks and policy advisors, and we're told that China doesn't have that kind of leverage. However, I do believe that if China wanted to have that kind of leverage, it probably could. The same goes for Russia. China's definitely the big brother in that relationship. And if the time comes when it will be to China's benefit to see an end to the war or to be the peacemaker because it no longer is concerned about handing over to the United States some version of success because the United States wants that to end, then it's possible that China might intervene on behalf of or on a mediation level. When it comes to the Israel-Palestinian issue, as I mentioned earlier, in the context of this brokered deal, China was not interested in stepping in. However, for the past 5 years, China has been suggesting that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict be taken for mediation in the United Nations. And this, of course, for Israel would be hard to believe that Israel would get a fair shake, given the voting patterns of the United Nations. At the same time, when you talk to Israelis about this opportunity or this option, they don't take it seriously. And if China continues a process of moving this conflict towards either through the Global Security Initiative or some other tools, moving it towards the United Nations, we may not see an end to the conflict, but we may see a much more difficult situation for Israel. And I guess with that, I'll leave it.
Great. Well, thank you so much on behalf of all of us of AJC and our audience. I really want to thank you both, Carice and Mercy, for being with us, for speaking with us, and providing such an illuminating and clarifying discussion. The Asia Pacific Institute continues to keep abreast of developments on the global stage, especially concerning China and other countries in the Asia Pacific. I was really happy to see some API board members, Marie, Joan, and Paul, ask their questions. So that's wonderful. Thank you again, and I'll turn things over to Daniel.
Thank you, Shira and Carice and Mercy. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you to our global audience for joining us today. As a reminder, you can stay up to date on this issue and many more by visiting ajc.org and or following us at AJC Global on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And lastly, don't forget to register for AJC Global Forum 2023, which is taking place in Tel Aviv. You can see the link in the chat. In Israel from June 11th through 14th. You can register today before the discounted rate expires. Again, that's ajc.org/global forum. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.